movie industry is an expensive business, and investing in a big budget film can reap huge rewards. However, sometimes even with a star-studded cast and a hefty budget, a movie can still fail to connect with its audience. Such is the case with Netflix's The Midnight Sky. Released in 2020, The Midnight Sky was reported to have cost Netflix $100 million to produce. Despite the impressive budget and elite actors such as George Clooney, who also directed the film, it really failed to resonate with audiences, and really didn't receive that good of reviews. In this video, we will explore why The Midnight Sky was probably a waste of $100 million. We will examine factors such as the lack of originality, the weak character development, and poor pacing, ultimately leading it to be a commercial and critical disappointment. In the film industry, a large budget can really be a double-edged sword. On one hand, having a large budget can allow for more elaborate sets, special effects, star-studded cast, all of which can help draw in audiences and create a visually stunning film. On the other hand, though, a large budget can also create immense pressure to turn a profit, which can lead to a more formulaic and less creative final product. When a film budget is used wisely, it can result in some of the most memorable and impactful films of all time. For example, the Lord of the Rings trilogy had a combined budget of $281 million, which in 2023 that would be $453 million. But the result was a sweeping, epic fantasy adventure that was both critically acclaimed and beloved by audiences. Another example of this is Titanic. Titanic had a budget of $200 million. Today, that would be about $372 million, but the production value and attention to detail in the sets and costumes helped to create a sense of immersion that made the story so much more powerful. Ultimately, the use of a film budget should be driven by the story being told and the artistic vision of the filmmakers. If the budget is used simply to create flashy special effects or to secure big-name actors, it could come across as hollow, shallow. However, if the budget is used to bring a unique vision to life, to create a sense of authenticity in the setting and characters, and to help elevate the story being told, then a major motion picture budget can be a powerful tool in the hands of a skilled filmmaker. Now, despite being released in the terrible year of 2020 and primarily distributed through Netflix, The Midnight Sky still failed to justify its massive $100 million budget. While the film featured an impressive cast and a visually stunning setting, the story itself lacked originality and failed to captivate audiences. The pacing was slow, the characters were underdeveloped, making it difficult for viewers to become emotionally invested in the plot. As a result, the movie was met with lukewarm reviews and failed to generate the kind of buzz that typically accompanies a film with such a large budget. Ultimately, the high production cost of The Midnight Sky did not translate into a memorable or engaging cinematic experience, making it a clear example of a wasted investment. Alright, so let me start by saying that on paper, this movie sounds a lot better than it actually is, which to me implies that it's not necessarily the story, but the execution. Although the movie is supposed to be about this feeling of isolation and being alone, the actors playing these characters come across as empty shells of people with very little depth, which makes it extremely difficult to understand them and by extension care about how they're feeling. Anyone can be quiet or look down at the floor to portray being sad, but it takes more than that for an audience to actually care about why you're sad and invest themselves enough to want to know more about what the character is going through. The movie struggles a lot with giving the viewer a reason to become emotionally invested. Now, from here on out, there are definitely going to be spoilers. So if after hearing everything I've said so far, you want to watch this movie without spoilers, skip to this time code. All right, 3, 2, 1, go. So the movie starts in the year 2049. We're at an observatory in the Arctic Circle where we see our first character played by George Clooney. His name is Augustine. Everyone besides Augustine is evacuated from the station due to a mysterious world-ending event. Augustine stays behind for a few reasons. One, he doesn't think there are any safe places left on the planet, and two, he needs daily blood transfusions due to an illness he has, and the station has the medical equipment needed. Now, in the beginning, we see him drinking a lot. He's obviously very depressed, probably because the world's ending, but as the movie goes on, we find that he just regrets a lot of the choices he's made in his life. It's at this point that the movie then goes back in time to a memory of Augustine's younger self. We see a scene of a presentation that his character is giving where he's speaking to a large crowd and he talks about a potential planet in our solar system that happens to be a moon of Jupiter. Now, it does this a few times throughout the movie and it's more to flesh out the character of Augustine. I'd assume he feels like he wasted his life on things that don't matter anymore or maybe never mattered. It's also the movie's way of giving us a better understanding to the kind of person he has always been been throughout his life. He's been career driven, he hasn't really cared about the people around him as much, he's kind of alienated himself from the people that cared about him the most. It's in this flashback that we see Jean, the potential love of his life, who he has pushed away. After he wakes up from this flashback, he then searches through active space missions and realizes that there's still one mission on a homeward approach. The ship is the Ether, returning from K-23, the habitable moon orbiting Jupiter that he discovered. It is soon implied that these are the only human beings left that are not on the dying planet of Earth. So it's at this point that he tries to contact them, but the communication device at the observatory that he's at isn't strong enough to reach the ship. You would think that the observatory he's at that is able to monitor all these missions would have an antenna powerful enough to talk to the ships out there, but this place doesn't have that, so he can't reach out to them and tell them what's happening. So it's at this point that we get our first look of the crew of the K-23 mission. It starts with this woman, her name's Sullivan. She's taking water samples from a stream. The place that she is extremely colorful. It doesn't seem like any place on Earth. She stands up, she walks down this beautiful canyon where there's a shot of the sky, and then you can tell that it's not Earth because you can see a huge image of Jupiter. And I'll admit, this is by far the prettiest scene in the entire movie. The colors and the lighting are beautiful, and it definitely made me feel like I wish I could be standing on this planet. She then sees in the distance a spaceship taking off, essentially leaving her behind. She runs after the ship before waking up on the ship, revealing that it was just a dream. It's at this moment that we also notice that she is pregnant. Now, this movie is based on a book. The book is called Good Morning Midnight. The book follows two main characters, Augustine back on Earth and Sullivan on the ship. Some of the main themes of the book are loneliness and isolation. Going back and forth between Augustine and Sullivan, it implies that although they are in two vastly different situations, they are going through very similar feelings of being isolated. In the book, however, Sullivan was not pregnant. However, right before shooting started for the movie, the actress playing Sullivan, Felicity Jones, who I really like, announced that she was pregnant in real life. And instead of hiring a body double for her, they wrote it into the script that she was pregnant. Now, I'm not implying that because it's different from the book, it's inherently bad. I am merely saying that things they decided to change from the book didn't help the story at all. And in fact, it hurt the tone of the film. Having Sullivan be pregnant in the story changes a little more of the dynamic than just having a crew member who is pregnant. The biggest thing that they had to change was that they had to write into the script that one of the other crew members was the one that got her pregnant. So instead of Sullivan feeling isolated in space, she is now pregnant with her significant other in space, which to me completely ruins the connection between Augustine and Sullivan. Augustine essentially has no one. Sullivan has the father of her unborn child, who she seems to have an extremely strong connection to. It's no longer these two characters in very similar situations in two different environments. Now it's just two completely different characters. To me, this causes a few issues. The book, like I said, focuses on loneliness that both Augustine and Sullivan feel from two different perspectives. When they made the decision to have Sullivan be in a relationship with a crew member, it not only changed the dynamic of her feeling alone, it also completely alters her situation. Yes, they may both be physically secluded in a sense, but Sullivan loses most of her depth, and the similarities of the two characters are completely lost unless you've read the book. So anyway, it's at this point that we see the other individuals that are on the ship. There are 5 of them. Sullivan we know, the captain, Gordon Alawale, then Mitchell, Sanchez, and Maya. At this point, they don't know anything that's happening on Earth. They don't know that it's dying. They don't know that most people are dead. They have been trying to contact Earth and have not heard back from anyone. They assume that there's just something wrong with their ship, and that's why they can't hear anything on Earth. Back with Augustine, he's watching the radiation creep around the observatory while he tries to figure out a way to contact the ether. While he's doing this, a fire breaks out in the kitchen. After it's out, he discovers that there's a little girl hiding in the kitchen who appears to have been left behind by the people who evacuated. He reaches out on the radio to try to contact the people who left the facility to see if anyone knows who this little girl is, but no one answers. The girl tells him her name is Iris by drawing a picture of an iris and him asking if that's her name. He then tries to reposition the station's antenna to reach the ether, but that doesn't work either. Back on the ether, the crew are anxious to get home, and they are growing more concerned about why they can't reach anyone back on Earth. The ship has this hologram system that allows the crew to relive these 3D memories to make them feel like they're spending time with their loved ones. It's an interesting way to try to flesh out the character on the ship, but it's only used twice in the movie, and only 2 of the 5 crew members use it. Back at the observatory, we see another flashback of Augustine. It gives us more of an insight of the type of person he's been his entire life. The woman Jean from the first flashback, who is implied to be the love of his life or the one that got away, tells him that he can relax because she isn't pregnant. She obviously loves him and is extremely upset because he seems to only care about the exploration of space. In this entire scene, he doesn't say anything or even turn around to look at her, painting the picture that he's kind of a dick. In the next scene, we then see Augustine going outside of the observatory to find the wildlife around them is all dying, meaning the radiation has gotten to them quicker than he expected. He decides that the best thing to do is to leave and travel to another facility that should be able to communicate with the ether. So they pack up and they head on their way. Meanwhile, back on the ship, everything's going fine until an alarm goes off, alerting the crew that the ship is off course for some mysterious reason. To me, this is such a cliche problem for a movie that takes place on a spaceship. I get that space is insanely huge, and getting off course is not that far-fetched of a thing that could happen when traveling from planet to planet. But a problem like this in a movie that already doesn't have an interesting conflict happening just seems like runtime filler. I get that the problem of everyone dying on Earth is a huge problem, but that's not a problem that our characters need to solve. Augustine is just trying to contact the ship. The people on the ship are trying to contact home. The problem I have with the ship mysteriously veering off course is that it just feels like they're giving the crew something to do. There's no explanation as to how it got off course. There's no nefarious act that somehow caused it to happen. It just mysteriously veers off course, and now the crew has to fix it. It's like, let's throw them a problem so they have something to do. It's never explained what set the ship off course. It's just a problem the crew now has to deal with. So they map a new course using a beacon they left at K23 and a satellite that's orbiting Earth. Now, this is a classic situation of a movie trying to sound smarter than it is. I've thought about this a few times, and I still don't really understand the logic here. They're going to use their known starting position and the end position to plot a course home. That's the idea. They use where K23 is and where Earth is to find their way home. Their conflict is avoiding the areas of space that are dangerous due to either meteor activity or just unknown areas that have never been mapped before, which is fine. That makes sense. Where it doesn't make sense is if they know where they need to go, which are the satellites orbiting Earth, and they know where they are, why do they need to know where they were? Why do they need to know the beacon around K23? Why do they need to use that to plot their course? It's just one of those things where they're trying to make it sound more science-y than it needs to be. All they needed to do was plot the course to the satellites around Earth and then use that information to avoid the areas that they need to avoid. What does it matter where they come from? Maybe I'm stupid. Maybe I don't get it. It's just a filler conflict, but it doesn't make any sense to me. It sounds better than, we'll just keep going straight. So anyway, they plot a course using the beacon from K23 and the Earth satellite, but there's still one area on their path that's unknown that they have to fly through. Again, super cliche, and the dialogue isn't doing the story or the characters any favors. You get lines like this.
This area. We haven't mapped.
Nobody's mapped it.
Or like this.
Okay, boss, but I sure don't like passing through zones that haven't been cleared.
I sure don't either.
Or this.
Anyone else have a better idea of how to get home?
All lines that have basically been said in other far better movies. So speaking of issues that characters have to experience to fill the runtime, let's go back and see what Augustine and Iris are doing. Now remember, they're riding a snowmobile in freezing cold temperatures in order to get to a facility that is so far away, they literally have to camp twice overnight along the way to get there. Also, the air behind them is toxic and closing in fast, killing all wildlife around them. And most importantly, they are racing to contact the last remaining hope for human life continuing. So naturally, they're going to stop at a wrecked plane they find along the way and search for things. It's never made clear as to why Augustine decides to stop at this plane. It is, however, already made clear that everyone on the planet is going to die, so the idea of stopping to look for survivors is irrelevant, and they never make it a point to say they need any sort of resources like food, water, or gas for the snowmobile. Not that the plane would have gas on it, but you get what I'm saying. There's nothing they actually need, so there's no reason to stop anywhere. You should literally just be beelining it directly to this facility. To me, this just comes across as more of a runtime filler. It's drawn out for way too long, and it doesn't give any character growth. It's literally just a waste of time. So Augustine walks to the plane, leaves Iris by the snowmobile. He goes inside to find a conscious passenger barely alive. The passenger pretty much asks Augustine to kill him because he's suffering, which Augustine does, and then the scene's over. That's it. Nothing happens. Nothing is learned. Augustine is already suffering from much bigger issues with the literal end of the world, all of his regrets leading up to this point in his life. This doesn't seem to be a life-changing or character-altering event. It's completely pointless. Stopping at the plane does absolutely nothing for the story or the characters. The next scene we see is another flashback, and it shows Augustine talking to Jean one last time, and although she said she wasn't pregnant in the last flashback, that seems to not have been true because she has a little girl with her this time. He talks to Jean and she offers him to meet the little girl if he wants to, which he does not do. And it's pretty clear that at this point he's chosen not to be a part of her life, which makes him kind of a terrible person. I get that these moments are meant to be like his biggest regrets in life, so that's understandable for the storytelling aspect, but to me it's just so boring. One of the biggest problems with this movie is the pacing. You have $100 million movie about a spaceship and the end of the world, and it's so boring. I think I could confidently say that this is one of the most boring movies about the end of the world that also takes place in space. To me, it feels like it was shot, scripted, and acted to be a movie that was going for Oscar nominations. It tries to pull at your heartstrings, it tries to make you sad, but it just completely falls flat because you just don't care. They make interesting scenarios seem so boring. Now, if this was the pilot episode to a miniseries, I could see it being way better received. But this movie is it. This is it. This is all you get. This is the story. So anyway, let's get back to it. The next scene, back on the ship, Sullivan discovers that she's having a girl, and the crew tries to subtly help her decide on a name, which again hammers home the idea that Sullivan does not feel alone. She's literally surrounded by people who care about her, totally missing the point of the character in the book, if you ask me. Again, doesn't have to be exactly like the book, but I think the main reason the book was so enjoyed was because it had this juxtaposition of two different characters that are similar but different. Now back on Earth. Augustine and Iris are riding a snowmobile for the second day through a snowstorm where Iris spots this Arctic camper. They stop and decide to stay for the night because of the weather. In the middle of the night, Augustine is talking to Iris about a girl he once knew that we can assume is Jean, the woman from his flashbacks. It's at this point where Iris says her only line in the entire movie.
Did you love her?
But wait, it's a dream! The RV is actually sinking into the ice. Augustine wakes up and has to help Iris out the window. He goes back for the blood transfusion machine and barely makes it out in time. He then tries to save the snowmobile, but in the process loses the snowmobile as well as the medical device. Now, I think that submerging himself underwater in the Arctic and then having to spend the next 10 hours or so at minimum in soaking wet clothes away from any kind of real shelter in extremely low temperature would surely be a death sentence. But nah, he's fine. And then a few minutes later, we see them finally at the station. So Augustine is finally able to contact the ether. They talk back and forth for about 30 seconds, and Augustine attempts to tell them about the conditions on Earth when the radio cuts out, because at that exact moment, the ship flies through a ton of space debris that heavily damages the ship. At the exact moment that they finally make contact with Earth. Are you kidding me? To me, this is just another lazy way to make this story more interesting. We've been waiting for them to talk to one another so that the crew of the Ether can find out about what happened to Earth, and the only thing the movie can think to do is another cliche spaceship problem where the ship flies through debris and it breaks the antenna, which forces the crew to have to send members outside the ship to fix the problem. Now, I love space movies, and I've seen a lot of them. Some of my favorite films of all time take place on a spaceship or are about space in general. Maybe that makes me a dork or a nerd, I don't know. But what I do know is that in a movie that takes place on a spaceship, if there's a time where the movie needs to send part of the crew out to fix something on the spaceship or to obtain something in space, then you can all but guarantee that one of those crew members are going to die. It's just the most obvious cliche thing that could possibly happen. The easiest way to kill someone in a space movie is to send them outside of the spaceship. So it's not like you don't see this coming. At this point, it just becomes a question of who's gonna die? Is it the pregnant main character? Is it the pregnant main character's boyfriend or husband? Or is it this random person who is no one? I'll give you a minute, you can think about it. Yeah, it's this one. She's dead. She's gonna die. Bye-bye. So the crew goes outside to fix the ship, and it's at this point that we're given the most amazing scene of the entire movie. The crew all sing Sweet Caroline by Neil Diamond. I can begin to know. Yes. A song that was written in 1969, and the movie takes place in 2049. and I'd guess that no one on the ship is over the age of 49. So you can assume by that math that everyone on the ship was born after the year 2000. Now, I know what you're saying. People today still like this song and it was written 60 years ago. I get it. I do understand that it's definitely possible that they know of the song. But to me, it's the equivalent of me putting on a song today that was written in the 1940s and everyone just singing along like it's their favorite song. I'm not saying that it's so far-fetched to think that they would know and even like the song, but it's just another moment that takes me out of the seriousness of the situation they're in. It feels like pure filler. It's a scene to pad the runtime and to give a pop culture reference to a song that is 80 years old to these characters. Is it possible? Absolutely. Is it probable? I'd say no. So all this scene does is stand out as something that just doesn't make any sense. It's just a way to shoehorn in a song that a lot of people in 2020 know. So after the sing-along, another space debris scene happens. But this time, the crew is outside. And yeah, you know what that means. Someone isn't making it back inside. Now in the book, the same character who dies in the movie dies in the book. The main difference is that in the movie, she dies by being struck by a piece of space debris, which causes her to bleed out. In the book, she suffocates in her suit. George Clooney said in an interview that he saw videos of astronauts in space playing with water, and he liked how the water formed into these little spheres in zero gravity, and he thought it would be interesting if it were blood instead, which I will say is a nice touch. It definitely made this death more visually interesting. So yeah, she dies, but they do manage to fix the issues with the ship, which allows them to receive images of what Earth looks like currently. This is another example of well done CGI. The shot of the dying Earth is one of the most interesting aspects of the movie. The idea that Earth is dying or is dead and everyone on the planet is doomed is extremely interesting to me. I'd say it's probably the most intense part of the movie. But the issue is that we never figure out what happens to Earth. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'm going to say it right here. You never figure it out. They never tell you what happened to Earth. They never give you that closure. We never get to see any other part of Earth other than Augustine and Iris in the Arctic. I understand that the book is not really about what happened to Earth, but why the book is a compelling story is because it draws similarities between the two main characters who are in two very different situations. The movie doesn't do that at all. The movie instead makes Sullivan's experience on the ship her trying to communicate with Earth because that's just her job. So if you take out the element of the story, which is comparing the two characters, you're left with a pretty basic story of just a spaceship returning from a long trip to a dying Earth and one man on the ground trying to warn that spaceship that Earth is inhabitable and they should just turn around and go back. That's really the entire movie. That's everything that the movie is about. They try to add this element to Augustine's character that he regrets his life, which is understandable, but to me it's one-sided. The movie teeters on the edge of trying to be like the book and explore loneliness and being alone, but changes things about the story that contradict that. If you wanted to really explore the idea of being alone and isolated, then making Sullivan in a relationship with someone on the ship should not have been added. I know that Felicity Jones was pregnant in real life, but with a $100 million budget, they could have definitely found ways to work around that. George Clooney even said in an interview that he didn't want to hire a body double, so that was obviously an option at one point. Instead of that, they chose to change the story in a very tone-altering way. So after they see the conditions on Earth, they are also able to get in touch with Augustine again. They have a back and forth, and Augustine sends them a plan that would have the ship slingshot around Earth instead of land on it, at which point they would head back to K-23. It's also around this point that the ship is able to receive incoming messages from Earth. The only member of the crew who has a family on Earth receives a message from his wife. It's in this moment where we see a glimpse of what has happened to Earth. Again, it's in these moments when we see a glimpse of what has happened that I find myself most invested in this story. More than anything else, I want to know what happened to Earth. That is by far the most interesting part of the story. But again, they never tell you, which makes all these moments seem like a waste of time. So after Mitchell sees this video of his wife, he asks the captain if he would be able to take one of their two shuttles back down to Earth and try to find his wife. Now I understand this. If I was him, I would most likely do the same thing. Even though he will most likely die and he may never even reach where his wife and family are, he has to try. It makes sense. Like I said, I would probably do the same. The part that doesn't make sense to me is that Sanchez chooses to go with him in order to bring the body of Maya home. Again, I understand the idea the movie is going for here, trying to pull at your heartstrings, but essentially he just chooses to die. He didn't think that maybe they could use a smart person like him on K-23 to help rebuild humanity. I mean, you literally increase the population by 50% by coming back with us, but essentially he just chooses to die. To me, it just comes off as a waste. Now he just chooses to die so he can bring a body of a dead person back to a dead planet. Seems like a good use of his time. So they get suited up for re-entry, they say their goodbyes, it's really sad, and then they take off. And we never see them again. We never see what happens. We're just left to assume that they die from radiation poisoning. After this, we have one final conversation between Augustine and Sullivan. It's in this conversation that the biggest twist is revealed. Sullivan thanks Augustine for what he did, and she explains that he was a huge inspiration to her joining the space program. She tells him that because of the work he did with her mother, Jean, it made her want to travel into space. She reveals that her first name is Iris, meaning that Augustine had only been seeing the image of his daughter, who he had never met, and the entire time had actually been traveling alone. Sullivan does not know that Augustine is her father. However, Augustine obviously knows that Sullivan is his daughter. The communication cuts out and the story ends. That's it. That's the movie. If I made it sound interesting, I apologize, because it's not. It's not a good movie. Movies with smaller budgets have the advantage of being able to take more creative risks and liberties. With a limited budget, filmmakers also have to rely on their creativity and ingenuity to tell their story effectively. This means that they are more likely to experiment with different techniques and styles, resulting in unique and original movies that stand out from the crowd. A smaller budget can also give filmmakers the freedom to explore themes or subject matter that may be considered too risky for a big budget production. In contrast, large budget movies often come with more pressure to appeal to a wider audience to recoup a significant investment. So let's talk a little bit about the 2009 film Moon. Moon was created on a $5 million budget and is probably one of the best sci-fi films I've ever seen. Directed by Duncan Jones and starring Sam Rockwell, the movie tells a story of an astronaut working alone on a lunar mining station who begins to unravel a mystery about his own identity and the true purpose of his mission. Despite being made on a fairly low budget, Moon features impressive special effects and a captivating story that immerses the viewer in a believable and thought-provoking world. One of the key reasons that the budget for Moon was so effective is that the filmmakers were able to focus on creating a strong script and a compelling story, rather than relying on impressive special effects or A-list actors. Sam Rockwell's performance is able to stand out in this film, and the minimalist production design is both immersive and effective in creating a sense of isolation and claustrophobia. The result is a film that is both visually impressive and emotionally engaging without relying on a massive budget or blockbuster-style spectacle. Another advantage of the low budget for Moon was the creative freedom that it allowed the filmmakers. Without the pressure to recoup a huge investment, the directors and producers were able to take risks and explore new ideas. The movie's themes of identity, loneliness, and the ethics of corporate power resonate with audiences and provide a thought-provoking background to the film's plot. Ultimately, the modest budget of Moon was well worth every penny, resulting in a film that has become a beloved cult classic in the science fiction genre. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to say that this is the worst movie ever made, or even in contention for one of the worst movies ever made. The visual and special effects alone show that they were at least trying to make an interesting movie. The one thing I will say, however, and the entire reason I decided to make this video, is that I have no idea how the movie cost $100 million to make. The budget isn't reflected anywhere on screen. If the movie cost 40, 50 million maybe, I probably wouldn't have even thought twice about it. But to spend that kind of budget on such a mediocre story, to me seems like such a waste of talent and resources. For comparison, in 2021, Netflix released another movie that takes place entirely on a spaceship called Stowaway. Based on the ratings, Stowaway also didn't really blow anyone away. It also wasn't reported to have any record-breaking viewer count like The Midnight Sky did. But the one thing it did have was a relatively small budget. The budget for this movie was only $10 million. Now, I'm not saying that these movies are one for one. The Midnight Sky definitely had more noticeable value put into it. But did it have 10 times the value? I'd say absolutely not. Based off the reviews, the reception of these two films was about the same, with people actually liking Stowaway more. I'd say the metric of viewer enjoyability is probably the one that is most important. That to me translates to more long-term views, with rewatches or people just suggesting it to friends. Netflix has said that within the first 5 days of it being online, The Midnight Sky was their most watched movie ever of any Netflix original within the first 5 days. They said that it was seen by about 72 million households during its first week on their platform. So in that sense, it's definitely not a failure. Netflix definitely knows how to get you to watch their movies at least once. I'd be extremely interested, however, to know how many repeat viewers this movie had. So what I'm saying is this: for the money that was spent, for the story that was told, it was probably a waste. If Netflix's goal was to just get a lot of their subscribers to watch this movie without a real desire to tell a compelling story, then I guess they succeeded, I suppose. But I think that the goal of a streaming service such as Netflix is to create content that people want to rewatch. Even at 72 million views within the first week, how much money does that actually amount to? Simple math would find that 72 million subscriptions at $13.99 per month, which was the going rate when this movie was released, would come out to $1,700,280,000 in monthly revenue. The average Netflix subscriber watches 69 hours of content per month. The Midnight Sky is 2 hours long, so that's about 2.9% of the average Netflix subscriber's watch time. 2.9% of $1,700,280,000 comes out to be just over $29 million, which is just under 30% of the total budget of this movie. Now, this obviously isn't the only monetary value the movie brings to Netflix. For starters, it'll most likely be a movie available on their service forever. So it will continue to be available to be watched by subscribers and pull in value that way. But what you can gather from this number is that if Netflix were to spend $100 million on 2 hours worth of content, it would need to be watched a total of 237 million times to equal that value. As of 2023, Netflix was reported to have just over 230 million subscribers. So by that math, you would need every Netflix account to watch this movie at least once, and then 7 million accounts to watch it a second time. I think that if streaming services like Netflix would focus on creating content that was captivating enough to be rewatchable, or focused on making content that was less expensive, they would be able to print money even faster than they already do. Netflix was reported to earn $4.5 billion in profits in the year of 2022, meaning they could pay for the budget of The Midnight Sky 45 times over in just the year 2022 alone. So I don't think they're losing sleep about wasting $100 million on a space movie directed by and starring George Clooney. I think for them, adding this movie to their catalog, even if it is pretty bad, is still a win. But was it technically a waste of money? I'd say yes. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know in the comments about what you think of this movie. Did you watch it? Did you enjoy it? Did you watch it more than once? I had so much fun making this as my first video, and I am working on a few others, so check back soon. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next one.